1891, early November. The sun had already gone crooked in the sky above the edge of the Sangre de Cristo Range, leaning low and burnt orange like it wanted nothing more than to set and stay down. Cold wind pushed in from the north, dry and bitter as a rebuke. It blew through the brittle cottonwoods along the edge of the Pecos River and found its way between the boards of the house where Esther Langford sat on the floor beside her stove, holding her youngest child against her breast. There was no fire, only ash. The stove had gone cold in the night, and she had not stirred to tend it. The child was 2 months old, and fevered sweat curling the baby hairs at her temple, breath shallow. Esther did not cry. Not anymore. There had been too much of it. She had cried when Henry rode off last spring. Cried again when they found the wrecked wagon near Fort Sumner and the letter half burned in the pocket of a man who was not her husband. She had cried when the corn crop died on the stalks in August, when the well dried up, when Amos, her eldest, stopped asking when Papa was coming home. Now there were no tears left, only silence and the work of survival. The other children were still asleep, or at least pretending to be. 3 boys, aged from 6 to 10, curled in threadbare quilts on the floor. The house was one room, unpainted pine, shrinking tighter every day under the weight of need. Her fingers were red and split at the knuckles. She had not eaten since yesterday's dry cornbread. The wind rattled the panes. Esther rocked the baby gently and looked at the gray morning through the warped glass. The wind didn't care. The land didn't care. Nothing alive or dead had cared for months. There had been a letter from her sister in Kansas, a kind one full of sympathy and hints that maybe it was time to come back east. But what would she be there, a burden? A widow with 4 children and no skills but the ones that let her milk a goat and dig a trench and patch a shoe. Esther looked down at the child again, her own breath shallow to match. "Please," she whispered, voice like dust, "you don't leave me too." Outside a crow cawed once, a ragged sound, then silence. She rose slowly and tucked the baby back in the blanket-lined crate that served as a crib. Her body ached from sleep on the floor. She reached for the iron poker and went outside in her apron, pushing her feet into cracked boots without socks. The air slapped her. She moved like someone half dead and too stubborn to lie down. The lean-to behind the house had a half bag of coal and some dry cow patties stacked under oilcloth. She shoveled both into her bucket and paused, staring out across the wide land. A figure moved on the far edge of the horizon, small against the sweep of yellow grass and rock. At first she thought it was just one of those ghosts your mind made when you'd gone too long without conversation. But no, it was a man on horseback, real as anything. She squinted. Her heart gave a short, confused kick. Men didn't just come out here. There was no road. She walked back inside, shut the door with her hip, and began to build a fire with stiff hands. Let him come. Or not. It did not matter. Not now. But when she stood again, brushing ash from her skirt, the baby gave a weak cry that almost sounded like hope. Esther set her jaw. The stove ticked and breathed its first warmth in days. Esther didn't watch the rider approach. She had no wish to stir anything in herself, not hope, not curiosity, not dread. The fire needed tending. The baby needed broth, though all she had was hot water and some salt scraped from the bottom of a tin. She made it anyway, trickling it into the child's mouth with a spoon. The wind settled a little by mid-morning, and the light grew clearer, though it brought no warmth. Her boys were up now, moving like sleepwalkers, faces pale, shoulders narrow as fence rails. "You'll split wood after breakfast," she said, her voice clipped but even. "Then check the snare by the creek. And I want all the kindling brought inside before sundown." They nodded, silent. Good boys. Tired, hungry, but still willing. It was Amos who first saw the man up close. He'd gone outside to piss and came running back in with big eyes and red cheeks. "There's a horse out there." "And a man." Esther stood slowly and wiped her hands on her apron. She did not smooth her hair or change her shirt. She stepped onto the porch. He was already off the horse, standing a few paces from the steps. The animal was a dapple gray, big-chested, dusted with travel. The man was taller than she expected, wearing a sheepskin coat and a hat pulled low. His beard was trimmed close, dark, with streaks of gray, and his face held the lines of hard miles. He removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said. She nodded. "I passed through town 3 days ago. They said a widow lived out here." "I do. They said you might need help." They were wrong. The wind picked up again, tossing her hair across her face. She didn't brush it back. "I ain't selling nothing," he said. "Not looking to take anything either." "Then what is it you want?" He hesitated. That pause told her he was a man not used to speaking much. "Work," he said finally, "or a place to sleep where I won't get shot at." She looked at the rifle leaning against the doorframe. He followed her glance. "I've been on cattle drives, ran fence, fixed wagons, shoed horses. I got tools, and I can pay for my stay if it comes to that." She let the silence stretch. The baby let out a weak cry from inside. "You got a name?" "Cole McKinney." His voice had a rasp like someone who had once spoken with force and then stopped for too long. She nodded once. "You can sleep in the barn," she said. "Water pumps behind it. Don't scare the goats." He gave the faintest smile. "Yes, ma'am." She turned without another word and stepped back inside. By nightfall he'd chopped enough wood to stack 3 rows high beside the house. He did not ask for food. She did not offer any. But she watched from the window as he laid his bedroll in the loft above the goats, checked their water trough, and fed his horse half an apple. In the deep of night, when the baby's fever broke and the boy began to breathe easy again, Esther sat in the dark, listening to the wind push against the house. She thought of the man in the barn, of how he had looked at her calm, respectful, without pity, and for the first time in a long while she didn't feel entirely alone. If the land felt alive, subscribe and keep listening. The next morning frost clung to the windows in delicate webs. Esther cracked the door and let the cold slide over her bare feet like punishment. She stepped out with a pail to fetch water and found McKinney already up, squatting by the well with steam rising from his breath. "Pumps slow," he said. "Lines part froze." She didn't answer. He stood, took the pail from her, and worked the handle until the first sluggish gush came. She let him. "You got a milk goat?" he asked. She nodded toward the lean-to. "Molly, she's stingy with strangers." He offered a dry smile and walked that way without asking. She watched him go, unsure what it meant that she hadn't stopped him. By midday, McKinney had mended the fence behind the garden and patched the chicken coop door. Her boys watched him warily, but when he showed them how to set a proper snare with smoother knots than they'd used, Amos's eyes lit up in something like awe. Esther saw it from the porch. The smallest one clung to her leg, and she stroked the child's hair absently. McKinney stayed in the barn. He never stepped past her threshold, never asked questions. When she left a tin plate with beans and cornmeal on the step that night, he nodded but said nothing and ate it in the yard. On the 3rd day she found him fixing the shed roof shirt off in the afternoon sunskin, the color of worn leather back crisscrossed with old scars. Not from war. These were closer, meaner, like someone had worked them in slow, methodical lines. She said nothing. He didn't notice her watching. That night she asked without turning, "You got family?" He took a breath before answering. "Had, That was all. And it was enough." After that he spoke more carefully in the quiet moments while sorting tools or sharpening blades. His father had been a blacksmith near San Angelo. Mother died birthing his younger sister. The girl died a year later from fever. He'd driven cattle north as a boy, fought in a war that left him hollow, then wandered. "No one waits for me anywhere," he said once. So I just kept going. She knew that kind of silence. Not the lonely kind, but the kind that sinks into your bones and becomes your shape. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not like a man stares at a woman, but like someone watching a fire hold on through the wind. By the end of the week, the baby was well enough to laugh. Her boys followed McKinney around like barn cats, and he let them, never soft but never harsh. He taught them to tie fishing line, sharpen a blade, clean a rabbit. At night, Esther sat by the stove after the children had gone to sleep, hands wrapped around her tin cup. Through the wall she could sometimes hear the low hum of McKinney humming to himself in the barn, and for the first time in nearly a year her heart didn't feel like a stone in her chest. Snow came early that year, quiet and sudden. By mid-November the ground was blanketed in white, the air sharp with the bite of coming winter. McKinney built a windbreak for the goats and lined the chicken coop with extra hay. Esther watched him from the kitchen window as he worked barehanded in the cold, sleeves rolled, breath thick in the air. He didn't move like a guest. He moved like the land had accepted him. She began setting a place for him at the table without announcing it. The boys didn't question it. They simply made space, as if he'd always been there. It was Amos who asked first, in the shy way boys test the world. "Were you ever a sheriff?" McKinney looked up from his stew. "No. You look like one," the boy said. McKinney didn't smile, but something passed across his face, wry, sad, maybe grateful. "No," he said again, slower. "But I did ride with one once." Esther said nothing, just passed him another piece of cornbread. That night, when the children were asleep, she lingered by the stove while he cleaned the lantern. "You ran from something." He didn't pretend not to understand. "I did," he said. "But not the law. Not trouble. Just myself, I guess." She nodded slowly, like that made sense. "I used to think if I just stayed still long enough, maybe everything would settle. Like dirt in a jar. But all it did was settle around me." McKinney looked at her then, the first time he'd looked too long. "You're strong," he said quietly. "But you shouldn't have had to be." Her throat tightened. She turned away. "I'll never owe another man again," she said. "You don't owe me anything." She looked back, and his face was calm, solemn, like stone warmed by the sun. Days passed. He taught the boys to oil the rifle and clean fish without wasting a sliver. Esther found herself humming sometimes when she needed dough. The baby gained weight. One morning a wagon rolled into the yard. It was a neighbor, old Gideon Briggs, come to check in, or so he said. But his eyes settled too long on Esther and longer still on McKinney. "You taking in strays now, Esther?" McKinney stood behind her, arms crossed. Quiet, still. "This is my land," she said flatly. "And he works for his keep." Gideon chuckled. "Work ain't what men come here looking for." Before she could answer, McKinney stepped forward. "You got business here." Gideon looked between them, then spat in the snow. "Don't forget where you are, Cowboy. This ain't yours." He climbed back in his wagon and rode off slow. The silence afterward sat heavy. Esther didn't look at McKinney. "He's not wrong." "He is. You'll have trouble if you stay." McKinney's voice was low. "Then I stay with the trouble." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, he was still there. That night the wind howled so fierce it bent the trees and sent snow spinning in tight, cruel circles across the yard. The goats cried low in their shelter, and the oldest boy tossed in his sleep. Esther sat awake, elbows on the table, staring into the stove's dull red glow. She didn't hear McKinney come in. The door hadn't opened. But suddenly he was there, boots dusted with snowcoat hanging off one shoulder. He'd used the back entrance, careful not to wake the children. "The barn roof's holding," he said. "But not for long." She nodded once. "Thank you." He didn't sit. just stood near the heat, arms loose at his sides. He looked worn, not from the storm but from something deeper. "Why'd you really stop here?" she asked. He didn't flinch. "Because I saw a woman standing in her yard holding this place up with her bare hands. And I thought if I die anywhere, let it be near someone like that." Her eyes burned. "You think I need saving?" He shook his head. "No, I think I do." A long silence stretched between them. Wind battered the walls. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "Before the war I was engaged. She waited 3 years. Wrote me letters. Every week. I carried them tied up in my saddlebag, but I never opened them." Esther looked up slowly. "She died of fever before I came home. I never answered a single word. I thought I'd spare her the worst of me. Thought I was doing her a kindness." His voice broke then just once. He coughed hard, turned away, and wiped his mouth. Esther stood, crossed to him, laid her hand tentative but steady on his arm. "She wrote to you anyway," she said. He looked at her, eyes wet but defiant. "You think it's too late to be the man she believed I was?" Esther didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away either. In the weeks that followed, the cold deepened. Gideon's words seemed to linger in the air like a threat. A few men came by, sniffing around with thin excuses, one wanting to buy feed, another just checking the fences. Esther knew what it meant. They didn't like that a stranger had taken up space where no one had been invited. One morning she found a butchered rabbit hanging from her door. No note. Just the gutless carcass, clean and twisted. A message. She burned it in the stove before the boys woke. McKinney saw the smoke and said nothing. But that afternoon he set up a target behind the barn and began teaching Amos and Will to shoot. Esther didn't stop him. That night they sat together by the stove, not touching, just close enough that the silence between them felt warm. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. He turned his head. "I know, but I want you to." McKinney said nothing, just reached over and took her hand slowly like she might vanish. Outside the wind quieted. Snow fell soft and steady like a blanket pulled over a restless world. The thaw came hard. By late January the snow began to pull back from the fence posts in dirty patches, and the earth underneath showed its old wounds, deep ruts, broken twigs, the curled bodies of rabbits that hadn't made it. The ground felt soft, but it wasn't kind. Not yet. Esther knelt in the garden one morning, breaking up soil with a dull hoe. She didn't hear the horses until they were close. 3 riders. Gideon Briggs among them, his eyes shaded by a felt hat and his mouth pulled into a smirk. The others she didn't know, both younger, both armed. McKinney was in the woods with Will and Amos setting traps. She was alone, her youngest wrapped on her back, the other child chasing chickens barefoot. "Morning, Esther," Gideon called. "Thought I'd stop by, see how things are run out here." She stood slowly, said nothing. One of the men shifted in his saddle, his coat swinging open just enough to show the pistol at his waist. "We got word there's a wanted man staying here," Gideon said. "Goes by Cole McKinney. Some kind of drifter. Lot of folks nervous." "He's not wanted by anyone that matters," Esther said. Gideon laughed. "Now that's a fine way to decide justice." She took one step forward. "He works. He feeds my animals. Teaches my boys to shoot and not to lie." "What do you do, Gideon? Sit in your parlor and drink through winter?" His face darkened. "You think he's gonna save you, Esther, that he's some kind of second chance?" She didn't move. "He never said that. And I never asked." The man to Gideon's right shifted again. "We could take him in, ask some questions. Just a day or two." McKinney's voice came from behind them. "No, you couldn't." The men spun in their saddles. McKinney stood at the edge of the barn, rifle resting easy in the crook of his arm. The boys stood behind him, wide-eyed but steady. "Put your guns down, boys," he said. "No one needs to bleed today." Gideon looked back at Esther, and for the first time there was something in his eyes like doubt. "You're picking a side," he said. "I already picked it." They didn't stay, just turned their horses and rode off kicking up mud. No parting words, no threats. But the message had been sent. That night Esther locked the doors, though she'd never done so before. McKinney stood by the fire with his jaw set tight. "They'll come again," he said. "Then let them." He looked at her. Really looked. "I don't want you in danger because of me." She stepped close, took his hand. "I was in danger long before you came. I just didn't know it." His eyes softened. "Maybe we leave," he said. "Start fresh. Somewhere with more than dry land and suspicion." She hesitated. "This is mine. Henry left it to me. I won't run." He nodded slowly. "Then quieter than I stay." She leaned her head against his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time as the fire cracked low and the baby stirred softly in her cradle. Spring came late, dragging its feet like a drunk on the long walk home. But when it came all at once. The air warmed, the creek thawed into motion, and the cottonwoods near the edge of the pasture put out their first tentative green. The boys found a fox den and named the kits after gunmen from stories McKinney had told them by the fire. Esther started her mornings before the sun planting rows of beans and squash, with Molly grazing nearby, her belly round again. They were a unit now. Not in name, not in law, but in rhythm. McKinney still slept in the barn, though most nights he never made it out there. Sometimes he stayed in the chair by the fire, watching the flames die. Other times he'd rest on the floor near the children, a rifle within reach. He had a limp, now slight but noticeable, from an old wound aggravated by the cold. Esther wrapped it in cloth and massaged it with oil made from pine resin. Her hands didn't tremble like they used to. One morning she found him fixing the porch railing sleeves rolled, humming low. "You still think of leaving?" she asked. He looked up, not surprised. "Sometimes. Old habit. And if I said I wanted you to stay—" He paused. "Then I'd stay. No questions." She nodded. "Then stay." That afternoon they rode into town together for the first time. Esther wore her hair braided back, a fresh ribbon tied in it, one of the last her mother had given her before she died. McKinney wore his cleanest shirt. People stared. Some nodded, slow and cautious. Some looked away. But no one spoke against them. At the mercantile, the shopkeeper gave Esther an envelope addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it slowly, scanning the lines with a furrowed brow. "It's from Kansas," she said, after a long moment. "My sister. She says they're selling the family farm and wanted to know if I'd come back and take a share." McKinney studied her. "And I wrote her once months ago. Told her I was surviving." He waited. "I'll write her again. Tell her I'm living now." Back at the ranch, the boys built a scarecrow and named it after Gideon. The joke made them laugh harder than they had in a year. Later, when the sun dipped low and the land turned gold, McKinney walked out to the edge of the field and came back holding a small velvet pouch. He placed it in her hand. Inside was a silver ring, plain but solid. "Had it a long time," he said. "Carried it through things I thought I'd never get past." Esther looked up at him, heart thudding slow and deep. "I don't need a vow," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I do." She slipped the ring on her finger. It fit like it had been waiting. They stood side by side as the wind softened the land, settling around them like a prayer finally answered. "Come spring," he said, "we'll plant more. Maybe fix the back fence, raise the barn roof higher. Maybe goats too," she said, "and chickens that don't fly off when you look at 'em." He laughed, quiet and full. And in the stillness of that moment, sun-low earth waking, the future unwritten but no longer empty, They leaned into each other, neither asking for anything more than what was already there. Subscribe and walk the thin line between law and survival.